motion, love to see them moving round, love to hear the drums a beating, love to hear the trumpet sound. I love to see the wheels in motion, love to see them moving round, love to hear the drums a beating, love to hear the trumpet sound. Lord, 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 Lord.
Well, Patrick, the first question I think I want to explore is related to your international experience, and just asking you to talk a little bit about the kinds of changes and realities that you're seeing in your international travels.
Right. Well, I don't travel that much.
No,
but
more than I do.
And when I travel, it's to do with evangelism and church growth. So I look at the experience through those lenses. I think that everywhere we go, I see churches and people adapting to very different circumstances, and they just deploy and marshal their gifts to meet those challenges. For example, recently in Kenya, the church is growing, but there's tremendous poverty. So I think they're redeploying their skills and people to meet those challenges. In Malaysia, for example, it's a Muslim country, so the Christian faith is always under a bit of a surveillance, and they would have to marshal different kinds of resources and have different strategies to deal with that. Actually, the most profitable part of this year's trip was that I stay over in the Diocese of Liverpool, and I met a lot of their work, and the circumstances are actually similar to ours. It's a rapidly secularizing society, and it's kind of interesting to watch how they have adapted to the challenges, and I think that they're a little bit ahead of us in doing that. I just met their diocesan staff and the pioneer people and spent an afternoon with Phil Potter. Yeah.
Excellent.
So, and I guess our circumstances are changing as well. I mean, remember when we all went through Party,
Yes,
the parish training program?
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't want to say how many years that was, but you look at the church, and how do you see the situation has changed?
Well, I've done a lot of thinking about that in preparation for this discussion and for the conferences, and I think my sense is that the basic ministry needs have not changed. I mean, I remember my internship in the parish training program, and that was in 1977, so it's a few years ago. You know, you had to do the 10 or 12 visits a week.
12 visits.
And there were verbatims and community involvement and special projects, and and I think in a sense provided an opportunity to experience in a very valuable way for me in terms of my formation for priesthood, a sense of what those ministry demands were going to be, and certainly my curacy, which I ended up doing in the same place where I did my internship, and then my experiences in a rural parish initially, reflected much of that pastoral model. But I think what's changing, from my perspective, is the world around the church, and what's needed is the kind of adaptation that you've talked about from the international perspective. That allows the church to continue to look at how it can connect to the changing society around it. I think around visiting, my sense in the latter part of my parish ministry, and certainly what I hear from clergy, is that it's you still need to develop those kind of relationships with people, but it's difficult to visit. I mean, you can't visit during the day,
right,
unless you're dealing with seniors and shut-ins. People are busy. If they have children, their mom and dad's taxi is going all over the place, and so you have to think about how you can connect in different kind of ways. And certainly, people of a generation younger than me, and younger than that, are finding all kinds of different creative ways of doing that with social networking and computers and cell phones and the whole kit and caboodle.
Right.
I think one of the other changes that's taking place is that the church has become much more marginalized in society, or at least the mainline church, anyways. And I think that's affected the what I would call the status of the cleric. Certainly, my experience in Minden, which I served in through the 1980s. I mean, I was seen as a significant person in the community. By the community, not the community at large, not just the church community, and look to for leadership in community activities and events, but I think that kind of status has changed, and the church has become marginalized. Its voice has become marginalized. I think we're doing lots of wonderful things in terms of advocacy and social justice in those areas to change that, but it's made it harder, I think, for people in the pews to see that they have that they can voice their Christian values, their experience, tell their stories.
I also find that part of this, rapid secularization, and by the way, it's similar my experience in Cowatamidonti. I mean, I was somebody. As I traveled down to Toronto along the 400, my status diminished as well. But I think that the parish priest today almost cannot afford to be simply a pastor. I think the society demands, like screening, for example, and the accounting rules. It's actually more costly to be church as an organization. At the same time, we have the kind of volunteer base that we can call on in the past are dwindling. So I think that the parish priest has to be a pastor and in some ways an administrator as well.
Yes, no doubt about it. And there always were administrative pieces to ministry, but I agree. I think that there's much greater.
And I also think that we can't afford not to talk about money today.
No, that's right. But I certainly valued the opportunity in the Toronto Parish Training Program to have the opportunities to be formed and shaped around that particular model. I think one of the areas that you and I are exploring in this session is that we need to look at variety of models.
Right.
We need more than just the sort of pastoral program-sized church incumbent, and the kind of skill sets that go along with that.
Right.
And I think that we definitely need to be moving farther and farther away from clergy who are working independently on their own, sort of the Lone Ranger model, to a much more collaborative and cooperative team kind of ministry.
Right.
Rescue.
Yeah.
So as we think about the different kind of skills that are going to be needed and the different kind of people that are going to be needed, maybe you could talk a little bit about what you see some of those being.
Well, I mean, for me, I can basically talk about York Scarborough because I think people do come to me from some Chinese background, and often a lot of evangelicals wants to become Anglican and ask me. So I think I always include a piece about how I project the church to be in the next 10 years, and I use the shape of a dog bone. I would say that the kind of pastoral work that you and I are trained in, and I really believe that it's kind of the model for which our canons are written and for which our pastoral formation was done, was the one parish priest, about 100 parishioners, able wardens. I think that kind of pastoral size model is dwindling, so the middle part of the dog bone is thinning out. I think that it's transitioning both directions. I think on the one hand, I can see churches that are able to offer what I call a kind of a full menu, caring for the old and the young and the children, would probably have more than one clergy, and definitely more than one staff. Probably have some kind of professional youth worker or children's worker, would have a very able administrator that would take like rental stuff off the plate of the rector. And so I see that growing, and I think that so we have more of those churches, but more importantly, I think more of the population in York Scarborough will be worshiping in those churches. So on the one hand, we need that. I mean, that is growing. Mm-hmm. But I also see that as another part of the dog bone growing as well. And that would be smaller churches, probably either served by half-time clergy or part-time clergy, or sharing a cleric between different churches that are really resilient. I think that they would have maybe a congregation of, about 50, or even smaller than that. And I think that there'll be a lot of creative stuff. It's like what we call a family-sized church, mm-hmm. and I see that growing as well. Mm-hmm. So that is a situation that I see in York Scarborough. How about you?
Yeah. Well, I think you're reflecting very similar kinds of patterns that are unfolding in York Simcoe, and I think the other areas in the diocese would be experiencing the same thing. I mean, one of the challenges that I face with the current status of multi-point parishes, mm-hmm. Is moving them out of a maintenance model,
right?
And because I think that's how they were designed to work.
Remember, I had a pretty good run at that.
Yes, oh, exactly, as did I. Yeah. Because they're designed to employ a full-time cleric. Yeah. I mean, you just throw enough of them together, yeah. so that they can provide the resources to be able to provide to support a full-time cleric. Mm-hmm. And I mean, thankfully, the largest one I have now is just a 3-point parish, mm-hmm. But I mean, you and I know that in the diocese in the past, I mean, we had some 6 and 7s at one time.
They were unequally yoked.
Yes.
Yeah. Actually, I became a lay reader in a kind of a 7-point parish up in Kevin's Manvers, mm-hmm. the whole place. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I still have that Bible to show for it.
Yep. Yeah. So I think it's the challenge of how you take those congregations which are in those smaller congregations which are quite vibrant, sustainable congregations at their level. Mm-hmm. I mean, they have a sense of ministry, they have mm-hmm. a sense of mission, they've got the resources to be able to keep things doing, and in many cases they really have a wonderful sense of mission and outreach into their communities. Mm-hmm. And I have to say that in some of those small towns and villages, they're the only place of worship in them.
Right.
Which almost moves them into a strategic kind of category.
Right.
But and I'm already using some part-time clergy to support those congregations. I could use more of them. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, I think what I have been working at for 11 years now is what we're starting to call hub ministry now, mm-hmm. Where we have a hub church, and it doesn't necessarily even need to be a large church, but that where the resources would be collected that could support some of those smaller churches in a team ministry kind of model. But it's been painful in some respects, watching that plan not unfold, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And the resistance that exists, sometimes from clergy, sometimes from parishes that are just seemingly too territorial or threatened by the sense that they would lose their minister, right, or have those kind of disconnects. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, what's driving it now is less a sense of mission and vision and more a sense of the financial realities.
Oh, that's very interesting. As you know, I just came back from this appreciative coaching thing with Rob Voyle, and he repeated many times during that training. It has very little to do with what we did, actually. He says, actually, if you have 2 small parishes that are struggling, and you combine them, you have a slightly larger parish that's struggling. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the thing to do is to figure out what you're about.
Yes.
And the only reason why, the only reason to have a successful amalgamation is that you figure out what your mission is and you believe that we can do it better together rather than separately.
I agree, and I've had an experience of that in what now is the Church of the Evangelists,
Right.
Because we went through a long process of looking at the overall ministry needs in Tecumseh Deanery, which is the sort of middle piece of my slice of the area. We were looking, we did using the benchmark material that was produced in 8 or 9 years ago, I guess. We discovered that we had an average attendance in the deanery of about 425, and we had 7.5 clerics. Well, the benchmark showed that it takes about 125 people to support a full-time cleric. So we were way over our capacity in terms of what was there. But it was a long process. It took a year and a half. I made the investment and met with various groupings from meeting with wardens in the various churches to having town hall meetings across the deanery. And eventually they asked me, well, what would you like to see happen? So I gave them my plan. Thought that would be a good model. And they came back at the next meeting with something entirely different, which actually unfolded. Two of the churches agreed to close, and we amalgamated Trinity Bond Head and St. Paul's Beaton into then Christ Church Tottenham, and renamed Christ Church the Church of the Evangelists in New Tecumseh. Right. That part was great. What happened afterwards was not so great, because there was a sense of vision and there was a sense of mission, but it got stalled. Now, unfortunately, some of that was the result of illness on the part of the cleric, which, because it was starting to get off the ground, and then that happened. But I think the other piece, which I'll take some responsibility for, was that the process going into the amalgamation took a fair amount of time and energy on my part. Right. And I kind of just let it go after.
I know the feeling.
It's just going to happen.
Yeah.
And it was under-resourced.
Right.
Now it's starting. It's clearly making. I mean, we have a new incumbent, and they're starting to pick up where we had left off. But we kind of lost 2.5 years in that. But I think it's going in the right direction, and it's getting the kind of resourcing that it needs in order to be able to move ahead.
Right. I think that the Evangelist is one of the first ones. I think that, the first successful one in the recent times. I think every time we do it, we learn something from it. Yes. I mean, it's not perfect, but so I can remember for us, the first that I can remember, that would be the Incarnation, and then St. Margaret's North Toronto, and now the Scarborough Grace. And so I think we're learning different things from it.
Yes, yeah. And I think we're going to see more of it.
Right.
Whether they're amalgamations or coming together in hubs or just even the recognition amongst what I would now call independent churches of the desire to be working together. I mean, one of my dreams is looking at the churches in Barrie, and there's 7 or 8 of them if you take the ones that are actually in the city and around it. That of looking at how they could cooperatively be doing things.
Right.
I mean, they don't need to amalgamate. They don't need to be together. Most of them are quite sufficient and sustainable in their ministries. Good things are happening, but areas of youth ministry, areas of outreach, areas of Christian education. I mean, they've got wonderfully rich resources in their incumbents and in a number of people in their parishes that could be used in a cooperative way in the city. To build up ministry, to nurture people, and to proclaim, good news in the midst of the social justice issues that exist in those communities. Same thing in Richmond Hill. So
right.
One of the good things that's happening in the life of the church, both here in the diocese, but clearly in many other parts of our communion, are what we're calling fresh expressions.
Right.
And there are some wonderful examples of those that are happening. I guess that one of the questions that we need to ask ourselves is that, does everything need to be a fresh expression?
I mean, the short answer is no. And actually, I think that my recent stay at Liverpool might be very helpful. I met 12 pioneer ministers, so I was drooling about the kind of resources they place. There are a couple of things that I've learned through them. I think the first one is Fresh Expressions is about reaching the unchurched. It's an entirely new generation. So if you want to use Fresh Expression to pay your bills, that's not going to give you the immediate results. However, I think that they had the poster about, like 3,000 people are in Fresh Expressions that would normally not be in church already. So they are really skipping a generation to the next one. So that's number one. And the second is I'm amazed at the amount of resources that the Diocese of Liverpool, which is about the same size as we are, it's kind of a small diocese in the Church of England, and they are just closing churches and not supporting them and taking clergy away so that they can do Fresh Expressions. So I think that's kind of a question for us. Do we want to give the resource for the next generation of the unchurched? I think the other thing that I found is that the people that I met were amazingly alive people. They are entrepreneur. They are centered on the scripture and have a vibrant spirituality, and they are all risking. It's amazing. So I think if you enter Fresh Expression, you have no tenure, and you have these sort of high caliber people doing that. The third thing is that I spent an afternoon with Phil Potter, and he said they've now discovered that every Fresh Expression has sort of an anchor in what they call a inherited church. So nobody is out there doing their own thing. Everybody has a regular parish, and so we may find kind of dual appointments. Somebody is assigned to Church X while doing Fresh Expression in Church B. I think now let me remember something. I think the cathedral has a missioner that does missions in the cathedral, while at the same time responsible for animating children's program in the rest of the diocese. So that'll be an example. Yeah. I don't have the details right, no. But so that'll be one thing. I think that in the long run, we I don't think there's anything that would prevent a kind of regular rector of doing some Fresh Expression stuff. As a matter of fact, I think that the reach grants that we give out, are less than $5,000, and it's usually for people who are in regular parishes trying to do something that's a bit outside the box. But I also think that there are still pastoral-sized churches that needs to be revived. I think that we can be best we can be. I think that as a matter of fact, I think that we need people who learn the skills to amalgamate churches, because it's challenging, and also some skills to close churches. I think that it's not just individual skills. I think as a diocese we need to honor people like that, and I certainly appreciate people who have seen the future and say, this is not a good use of my time and God's resources, so I will do that, and I may have to look for a different job, but it's still the right thing to do. I think we need to encourage people like that.
Yeah, I agree. I think when I think about Fresh Expressions, I think about it in the context of what Archbishop Williams terms mixed economy, because we are certainly in the midst of a mixture of expressions from the inherited church and the models that we live with, which clearly appeal to the majority of the people who are going to them.
Right.
I mean, it's not. I mean, we have thousands of people that are walking into our doors Sunday by Sunday by Sunday, and in most cases experiencing what you and I would call a traditional expression.
It's working for them.
The Anglican Church.
It's working
Absolutely,
for them.
it's working for them.
Yeah.
And But the good news is that in the midst of that context, in the midst of that context, there are many of those congregations that are recognizing that it's appealing less and less to the people who are now living in their communities.
Right.
And the courageous ones, the ones that are willing to take a risk, and to put some time and resources into doing something different, are reaching out and experimenting with the Fresh Expressions
Right.
ministries, and it is a risk because I think one of the it may seem a contradiction to say this, but I'm encouraged when I see some failures, because at least we're trying, at least we're discovering it. It's there's no clear path ahead. I mean there are some that say the church is in a pretty critical place. I disagree with that. The Anglican Church may be in a critical place, but God's church isn't. But regardless of that, I think it's we need to. We're recognizing very quickly that as we've titled this this session, that we need something new,
Right.
for our old treasures.
Yeah, I prefer to not use the model of traditional new or old and new. I would think I go for what is appropriate. I think that I think you can get a traditional service in such a way that it really appeals to young people. I think that the younger people are actually looking for some kind of structure. So it's not the old argument anymore.
Oh, I would agree with you.
It's not just guitar versus organ. It's whatever gives life to people.
Exactly. And I think we have to be very careful, because there are lots of young people who find great nurture and enjoyment in very old-fashioned traditional kind, what I would call old-fashioned traditional kind of expression of worship, and others that would be the last thing they would ever want. It's not about age or category. You're right. I think appropriateness makes a lot of sense.
So we need church planters. We need church revivers. We need people who just wanting to learn, and we need church closers. We need church amalgamators. Right. So I think that people talk about the window shutting down for clergy. Certainly, my difficulty of having more than 10 places to fill 2 years in a row, and I see a lot of retirements coming. So I think that there will be work for people who rise up to that. But I think that the window for when we ordain to say we do pastoral work and we do a good liturgy, and that would work. I think that window is closing. That's what I see anyway.
Yeah. I think I'd add one more group to your list that I think is an important group, and that is associates. As we look at more, again, I use the word hub because that is working its way through this conference as a model. It means that we're going to be inviting clergy to work in the context of teams, and to share a common leadership, and in a way that hopefully doesn't see that if you're not the head of the whole outfit, then you're sort of second class, or you don't have the skills to make it.
I don't think our culture is there yet.
No,
I think we need to go there.
Yep.
I think that's a good segue into what I'm interested in. I mean, George, what do you think are some of the skills that clergy needs to learn to thrive in the coming future?
Well, I think basically, I think ministry will always be rooted in people's faith and relationship with God, and I think that they're going and I think we need people who are grounded in their spirituality, who continue to have expertise in biblical studies and theology, so that I think the certain core of theological training, I think that needs to be there.
Right,
I don't think we're talking about moving out of the direction. I think we need people with skills. We certainly need people with entrepreneurial skills.
Right.
We need people who are willing to take risks. We need people who are able to do what I would call needs assessment and discernment around the discernment of the situation and the communities in which they find themselves. And I think one of the most significant pieces that's needed is that we need people who have the skills to be able to equip others to share in that ministry.
Right.
I think that's absolutely critical. And we've talked about lay ministry, and I think that we have seen certainly during my time in the church, over 33 years now, we've seen. I mean, it's amazing the ways in which women and men in our church who are not ordained are sharing in the ministry and life and witness of their communities in a way that's very, very different from what it was. That's been a huge change.
Right.
But I think we're just scratching the surface in one
Right.
sense,
Right.
because I think we have far too many people who sitting in our pews who are unequipped
Right.
to take on what I think any Christian needs in this day and age to simply live faithfully,
Right.
and to understand how their living faithfully connects to their understanding and belief in their God.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think that you talk about associates. I think that for me, I think some of the skills to develop, some people need to develop the skill to lead teams, and other people need to develop skills to work in a team as a second chair, like we do as suffragan bishops, you know.
Yes.
And I think that those skills, sometimes you have to change them from job to job. You know.
Oh, certainly you have.
Yeah.
Again, that's the adaptability piece. But I mean, as I've been thinking about these different kinds of models, I thought, gosh, it'd be wonderful, to be part of a team where you didn't have to worry about some of those other things, and you could actually be involved and doing the things that you do well, that excite you, encourage you, build you up. It's not that you're not going to have all the crap that you normally have in your life, because that just never goes away,
right?
and that's not just in the church. But the leader has responsibilities as a leader. I think the knowledge of the college model is a good one.
I was saying, suffragan is good.
Exactly. Colin's got stuff on his shoulder that I'm quite thankful is on his shoulder.
You be in charge. We're going to have some fun.
Exactly.
Actually, I think we can go on, and cataloging those skills, and for me, it's not actually important. I think that the people, the bright people of our conference would figure it out. I'm more concerned about internal skills. I think it's a matter of motivation and ease, with yourself, and this curiosity of rejuvenating. I think on the one hand, you have to be rooted as, within God's plan. What am I about? And if you figure that one out, then you can have the kind of internal skill of not being frazzled when things don't go well, of sort of failing and then picking yourself up and trying it again.
Yes.
And I think the skills of always resourcing yourself and out there finding it, I think those are more important things. And I was hoping that, we have a bit of our faith, our hope, money in education. I'm much more interested in seeing and finding sort of tools that can work on that level. And also then to say, fine, coming from where you are and what you need, go and find the resources that you need.
For you and I that are in this category, where we've lived through many of these changes.
You mean we're old?
Yeah, we're old. Exactly, we're old and getting older.
Yeah.
I guess the question is how do you retool, and perhaps even the question of can you retool? Well, I'm absolutely convinced you can retool. And I like to think that when I look back on my ministry, that particularly in the way in which I've used quite intentionally my professional development money, that it's often been in areas where I have felt inadequate or recognized that I need these skills in my toolbox. And they've been, I mean, I won't go through them all, but they certainly provided a way that helped me in that process of adaptation, because it is about adapting. I think those opportunities are there. I think the diocese has been quite proactive in offering those kinds of tools and opportunities for clerics to and lay people to experience that. I mean, we've had people like Andrew Weeks. There's the Rob Boyle's been in the diocese.
Right.
I think and the Natural Church Development (NCD) stuff has played a significant role in part of that retooling. Not just the cleric, but the life of the congregation and the laity in it as well. And I think another encouraging thing that I have seen in certainly, which is very different from clergy when I was first ordained, is that there's the number of people that now have spiritual directors, and that really find themselves anchored by that relationship. And in some ways, when I look back in the parish training program experience, the best parts of that experience were the supervisory hours. I remember Andrew Hutchison, who was the first director of the program. His mantra was, and I mean, I don't think he made it up, was that experience doesn't teach you anything until you reflect on it. Yeah. And that's, I mean, certainly a spiritual director plays a role in helping a cleric to do that. I mean, there's other ways you can do it, but that's certainly one. So I think that we need that kind of reflection. We need to do it. I think we need to do it individually, but we also need to do it as a church. And I think that's one of the opportunities that this conference is providing. In that, you know, we live in a diocese where we experience things all the time, but this is a chance to stop and say, okay, how are we going to reshape things? How do we retool ourselves? How do we connect ourselves inwardly to where we believe the Spirit is leading us into the future?
I think as an organization, as a family, as a body, my wish is that we will get out of the mindset of scarcity into the mindset of abundance. That there are all kinds of resources out there, people, money, opportunities. If we have the interest and the courage to look for it. I think our faith, I hope, actually proves that.
Yes, it certainly does. Oh, incredibly.
And that there are people that are hungry and wanting to hear the good news of Jesus because it would enrich their lives. I think another thing that I try to do is to not spend so much time on problems. I think that if we solve the problems, all we have is a little bit something with no problems. That's not good enough for me. I want life to be full of excitement.
Yep.
And so the church, if we focus on growing those things that are life-giving, and I think as a bishop, I would like to learn to do that with my colleagues, the clergy, not to look at what's wrong with the situation, but what's right, or how can we overcome that to the. And I must say that it's old habits die hard. You know?
Oh, they certainly do.
And I think as a person, I don't want to be doing the thing that I kind of semi-like, and then when I retire, just stop. I think I want to grow. You know, what can I do with my life that I would find interesting till the way I die, and then figure out a way of making a living out of it.
Yep.
You know,
yes. Yep.
so and I want to invite other people to do the same.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think life is too short to just stay around. I would find more life-giving things.
Yes, it's that wonderful quote about our heart's desire connecting with the world's needs.
Right.
I mean, if you're cranked by what you're doing, if you're empowered by what you're doing, and it's connecting to something that's making a difference in the lives of others and in the community around you, then, I mean, I don't know what's much better.
It works for parishes as well. I heard a story about this tiny Episcopal church in the Midwest. The town is dying, and so the church is dying with it. So what they've decided to do is to say, we will be a resource to one community group per year. And so the first year is the firefighters. They don't have a lot of money, so they give them about $500, but then anytime you need the fire hall painted or you need a meal, just come to us. I mean, I think that 10 years later they're still around. and so one community after another comes to them. And I don't think they grew, but they became an indispensable part of the town.
Yes, yeah, it would be nice to think that our church communities are an indispensable part of the community in which they find themselves.
But you have to think
that'd
that
be
way.
wonderful. Oh yeah,
if you think survival, or at any level, then all you would have is just to hang on to life.
And I have to say, I mean, one of the questions that I think about in these contexts is what gives me hope as I look around and see what's happening, and I do find great hope when I go from church to church to church in my area, and to a lesser degree in terms of the number of churches I go to in the diocese, but see both congregations and clergy and individuals in those congregations trying to do just that, to connect and make a difference, and they really do. I mean, it's we've got lots and lots of good news stories all over the place. About how God is working in the lives of individuals and in the church, that I find just so heartening, and give me hope, despite all the negative things that you could dwell on.
I have to put this one in. I think what gives me energy is that I would love to tease the Anglicans in the Diocese of Toronto to be able to share their faith, because I think they're doing that already. They just don't.
They don't realize they're doing it. That's exactly right.
And
that's right.
So on Sunday, I was teasing a congregation with the mental image of how they do it. So we'll see.
We'll see. Indeed.